Thunderhead by Mary O'Hara, Chapter 2. Ken stood listening to Howard's retreating steps. He heard the rasp of the corral gate being opened and closed again. Now they were alone, the mare, the foal, and himself. In the stable yard was a sweet quietness, and the smell of hay and horses. Ken sat on the manger rail close to the feed box, in which he had placed the bucket of mash, and the mare dipped her muzzle into it, ate hungrily, then lifted her head and chewed, looking at Ken. Her long ears pointed forward. She had gentle golden brown eyes with a seeing expression in them. Looking at Ken, her intelligent face was not a foot from his. He straightened the flaxen forelock that hung between her eyes, murmuring her name now and then. She swung her head around to look at the sleeping foal. The lantern, hung on the corner post, only half lit the stall. Ken, too, looked at the foal. Now that he had it safely in the stable, the surprise and worry that he had felt when he first saw it took possession of him again. What a to-do this was going to make. A white foal out of Flicker. A white foal on the Goose Bar Ranch, where everyone knew Banner, the big golden sorrel stud that sired the yearly crop of colts. Ken's uneasiness was linked to a series of nearly disastrous events of past years in which he and a certain line of horses had been involved. This train of events led directly to the small white foal lying there so innocently on the clean hay, and it had begun long before, when a wild stallion of the plains, called the albino because of his white colour, had stolen a mare from the Goose Bar Ranch. She was the thoroughbred, Gypsy, one of Rob McLaughlin's foundation mares. He had bought her when he was a cadet at West Point and used her for polo. When he had graduated and then resigned from the army in order to go in for horse breeding, there were 3 of them that came west together and settled down on the Goose Bar Ranch. Rob McLaughlin, Nell, his young New England wife, and the black mare, Gypsy. Rob bought more mares and built up his foundation stock. Then, one spring, Gypsy disappeared. The McLaughlin Ranch was not the only one in that section of Wyoming from which a fine mare disappeared. There began to be talk of a white stallion, a big ugly devil but a lot of horse, who had formerly ranged the open land of Montana, had come across the border during a drought, and had gathered a band of mares in the open land of Wyoming, stealing from ranches, tearing down fences, fighting, and even killing other stallions. He reigned for 6 years. Then a number of ranchers banded together, held a roundup, and caught the albino and his mares, finding brands from all over the state on the hides of the stolen mares. Gypsy of the Goose Bar Ranch was there with 4 beautiful colts. Rob McLaughlin was delighted with their looks and speed and outstanding personalities, and took them home with him, feeling that Gypsy's philandering might contribute valuable qualities to his polo stock. But he found it impossible to break and train the colts. Even though the fillies were bred by Banner, the Goose Bar stud, than whom no horse could be more intelligent or better mannered, yet the offspring showed the outlaw strain. He explained it to his boys. Colts learn from their mothers. They copy them. That's why it's practically impossible to raise a good-tempered colt from a bad-tempered dam. The colts are corrupted from birth. That is the rule. There are, of course, exceptions among our own horses. Here is Gypsy, the best-mannered mare in the world, with a bunch of wild hoodlum colts. Absolutely unbreakable. Is it because they were born and brought up with that gang of wild horses? Asked Howard. It's because of the prepotency of the stallion, said Rob grimly. His wildness outweighs all her gentleness, and that, of her long line of aristocratic forebears, some stallion. But all of this was an old story to Howard and Ken. They had grown up on the Goose Bar Ranch, familiar with talk and speculation about the near-mythical personage, the albino, and witnessing their father's struggles with the outlaw strain, which, through Gypsy, had been introduced into the breeding stock. Ken's actual involvement in this tangle was of more recent date. On a day a little more than 3 years ago, he and Gus had been working in the meadow and came upon a new-born foal and its dam. "Lacka de little Flicker," exclaimed the Swedish ranch hand. "What does Flicker mean, Gus?" asked Ken. "Swedish for little girl," explained Gus, and when, a year after that, Rob McLaughlin told Ken he could have his own any colt on the ranch up to 1 year of age, Ken chose that same little golden filly and named her Flicker. Flicker was out of Rocket by Banner, and Rocket was, by common consent, the wildest of the offspring brought home by Gypsy from her sojourn with the albino. Rob McLaughlin was exasperated. "I was hoping you'd make a wise choice, son," he said. "You know what I think of Rocket. Of that whole line of horses, it's the worst I've got. There has never been one amongst them with real sense. The mares are hellions and the stallions outlaws. I'd have got rid of this whole line of stock if they weren't so fast that I've had the fool idea that someday there might turn out one gentle one in the lot, and I'd have a racehorse. But it's not going to be Flicker." But Ken had fallen in love with her and could not give her up. That summer, one nightmare disaster followed the other. Flicker, as wild as her wicked black mother, fought beyond all reason when she was roped and brought in. When she could escape no other way, she made a suicidal leap into the high barbed wire fence, and there ensued a long illness from the infected wire cuts, terminating in McLaughlin's command that, next day, she should be shot and put out of her misery. Ken spent that night with her sitting in the stream where she had fallen, holding her head in his arms. Gus came looking for them in the morning and carried Ken, helpless with cold and exhaustion, up to the house. This caused Ken's long and severe attack of pneumonia, during which, miraculously, the filly recovered. At the end of the summer, there was one triumph which made up for everything. The filly loved Ken as dearly as he loved her, and he was able to say to his father, "She did get gentled, didn't she, Dad?" And Rob McLaughlin answered, with a softer note than unusual in his voice, "Gentle as a kitten, son." And now here she stood in the stall, a husky 3-year-old, docile, gentle, beautifully trained, resting her liquid, trusting eyes on the face of her young master. But the foal, that all-conquering prepotency Rob McLaughlin had spoken of, after all the trouble Rob had taken to rid his stock of the hated blood of the albino, here it was cropping out again. This foal was unlike its dam, unlike its sire, unlike any horse on the Goose Bar Ranch. It resembled only one, the albino. It was almost like having the albino right there in the stall. Was the power and ferocity of the great outlaw enclosed within that mottled baby hide of pink and white? This thought made shivers go through Ken. Flicker had finished her mash. Ken lifted the bucket down and went to the door of the barn. He swung the top half open and looked out. It had stopped snowing. The wind had reversed itself and had blown the storm back into the east whence it had come. There was a riot of scudding clouds in the sky, with the big stars close and bright, going in and out between them. It was much warmer. Ken folded his arms on the bottom half of the Dutch door and leaned there thinking. There were still other shadow shapes woven into the aura that encircled the foal, like the predictions of a fortune-teller. That word Rob McLaughlin had dropped so casually into Ken's thought stream that day. Racehorse. Racehorse. It could not, of course, be Flicker, owing to the thickened tendon which was the result of her infection. But why not a colt of Flicker's, with a sweet and tractable mother to teach him manners, with the power and speed which came down to every one of the albino's line? Why not? It had been Nell who had first made this suggestion. Since then it had not been out of Ken's mind. Ken turned from the barn door and ran his hand down that right hind leg of Flicker's. It was his fault, that thickened tendon, because he had made them catch her for him. But you're not sorry, are you, Flicker? He whispered, going to her head, because now you've got me. Her face, leaning against him, was very still and contented. The foal, the little race-horse to be, lay with his back curved, his feet and nose drawn together like a greyhound asleep. Perhaps he was dreaming of his great future, to redeem the ranch from debt and failure, to deck Nell out in jewels, to make his young owner a hero. Ken bent over him again. His name, what should his name be? Something to sum up all that he was and might become. Ken could think of nothing fine enough. His mother would name him, probably as soon as she laid eyes on him. She had a way of doing that. Some words would spring to her lips, and out of them the name would come. That would be tomorrow evening. Ken took the lantern, gave one look backward, and then left the barn, closing the door tightly behind him. He ran down through the gorge. In front of the rambling stone ranch house were several acres of lawn, called by his mother the Green, after the neat little village greens of New England where she had spent her childhood. It was covered with a thin sheet of snow. Ken ran across it to the house, and, in the warm kitchen, took off his slicker and sou'wester and drank the hot chocolate Howard had made. While they sat drinking, the two boys engaged in one of the wrangling, incomprehensible, and wholly oblique discussions which make adult listeners conclude that the constitution of boys' minds and their language have nothing to do with reason, logic, or natural facts. That's the end of chapter 2. Good night. Sleep tight.